The House Armed Services Committee began consideration this morning of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2014. The bill will appropriate funding to the military of this coming fiscal year, and some highlights in the current draft bill involve the detention facility Guantanamo Bay. The language of the current act says that Congress maintains the bipartisan prohibition against transfer of detainees from Guantanamo Bay to the United States or to countries with confirmed cases of transferred detainees returning to fight. Well, this sums up the earlier sentiment from earlier in the week that Congress wants the detention facility kept open and funded, ostensibly barring the administration from transferring its terror suspects to prisons within the United States or to a foreign country without the use of the national security waiver. With me to discuss the NDAA and its future, I'm joined now by RT political commentator Sam Sachs. Hi there, Sam.
Hey, Margaret.
So talk to me about this new version of the NDAA. How is it going to impact Gitmo?
Sure. Well, it's a new version for 2014 of the National Defense Authorization Act, but it contains the same provisions from last year's NDAA when it comes to Guantanamo. And that is, as you mentioned explicitly, ban on any of the funds that are authorized in the National Defense Authorization Act to be used to transfer any prisoners from Guantanamo to the United States or to any other country that has seen released prisoners re-engage in terrorist activity. One of the ranking members on the House Armed Services Committee, Democrat Adam Smith, immediately took issue with this language. I think we have a clip of it right here.
The continued presence of Guantanamo Bay Prison, I think, is a stain upon this country. It is becoming unsustainable. It was built as a temporary facility 10 years ago. There is $250 million in military construction requests just to keep it temporary. Given its location and given the difficulties of maintaining it, that's always going to be a challenge. I would urge members...
And really, Congressman Smith went on to say that he doesn't have the votes, though. I mean, this is a committee that's dominated by Republicans. And, so if President Obama wanted to re-engage with Congress on this issue of Guantanamo, he's not off to the best start because Republicans don't seem to want to do anything. But they did still leave this national security waiver in the NDAA, which gives President Obama the authority to start transferring prisoners out of Guantanamo Bay if he says it's in the national security interest of the nation. He can do it right now. He just chooses not to.
So he may have some authority there that he may not want us to know about. Okay, so the broader war on terror, I want to take you to that now in Afghanistan. What does the NDAA mean for our future conflicts? If you can talk to me about that.
Sure. So the NDAA authorizes funding for our wars, including our war in Afghanistan. Now, it does put some strings attached in this year funding for Afghanistan, and that basically says that any funding to train Afghan security forces is contingent on the fact that we come up with a bilateral agreement with Afghanistan to make sure that we keep troops there beyond 2014, some sort of safety agreement there, which could mean, anywhere from 12,000 to, even more troops that remain in Afghanistan moving forward. As far as this broader war on terrorism, I guess the war against associated forces of al-Qaeda, as the Obama administration has defined it in the AUMF. This particular NDAA does have some language that's going to require the administration, require the Department of Defense to identify who these associated forces of al-Qaeda are that we are at war with. We learned from a WikiLeaks release a few years back that there are over 60 organizations that the Department of Defense has labeled as associated forces of al-Qaeda. And they include things like the Iranian intelligence, Pakistani intelligence, Hezbollah, Hamas. So Congress wants the Department of Defense to come to them and say, explain why we are at war with these associated forces, exactly.
Okay. A lot to get to in this bill, Sam. I want to take you now to the drone killing program. Does the NDAA mention this, and has Congress put any additional oversight in place regarding it?
Kind of. When the president gave a speech a few weeks ago, he said that he has consulted Congress on drone strikes and on missions that go beyond our traditional war theater of Afghanistan. And that's partly true. But there is a provision in this by Congressman Mac Thornberry. He's a Republican. He's the chair of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Emerging Threats. And it basically codifies this requirement for the administration to come to Congress and tell them of any targeted killing strikes, any capture missions that happen around the world, not in countries that we're directly at war with, like Afghanistan. So this is something that the administration has kind of already been doing, but this codifies it and makes sure that future administrations do it as well. So this is slight oversight of the drone program, but it's after the fact. It really doesn't give Congress any leeway to determine, how these strikes are carried out. It just allows Congress some insight into, what the administration is doing as far as it comes to this targeted killing program.
Okay. A hodgepodge of issues under this bill. Moving now to Syria.
It funds the war machine, and that's a pretty vast topic. Really.
Okay, so moving quickly now to Syria. I understand that Congress has mentioned Syria in this upcoming bill. Is that correct?
Sure. There's, and this is, of course, we're talking about the House version of this bill here, and there's language in the bill to require the Department of Defense to come to Congress and lay out all the options that are on the table when it comes to Syria. There is nothing in this bill about funding the Syrian opposition. Interestingly, a few weeks ago, the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee passed a provision or legislation that would fund the Syrian opposition. So next week, the Senate will take up their own National Defense Authorization Act. They'll begin debate on that, and they might throw something in there about arming the opposition. We don't know yet, in which case the House and the Senate will have to kind of work that out. But so far, nothing in the House bill about funding the Syrian opposition, just a requirement for the Department of Defense to lay out all the options that are on the table for Congress.
There seems to be so much going on in the NDAA coming up. I want to talk to you about the sequester. It seems to impact everything except for the NDAA and its provisions. It certainly hasn't seemed to have affected Gitmo any. Has the money slash across the board affected any of these programs?
Well, it's going to. I think that a lot of the legislators in the House Armed Services Committee still have this strange belief that the sequester is not going to take hold, that somehow Congress is going to come to a deal, Republicans will agree to tax hikes. That's not going to happen. The sequester is going to kick in, and a lot of these funding levels are going to be cut by about 8 to 9% in each defense program. So there will be an impact here. It seems like lawmakers are trying to boost spending levels in certain programs before that sequester takes effect. There was a lot of concern about certain money that's being spent. There was huge opposition to any base closings, even though we know that sequester is coming down. There's still a lot of money that they want to spend on missile defense programs out on the West Coast and in East Asia, and still a lot of money going to Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. Still, despite all the cuts that have
so much to talk about with this. We are out of time, unfortunately. Thank you for that, though. That was RT political commentator Sam Sachs.